Good afternoon on what is a warm, bright and breezy day. It is Tuesday the 30th of April and I'm in the reading up with a nice hot cup of tea. And to open, what I've got in here is a copy of So You Want to Be a Game Master by Justin Alexander. So, become the ultimate game master. Thanks to tabletop roleplay, millions of fans are creating unforgettable collaborative stories. No matter what role-playing game you want to play, this book is the key to unlocking the endless adventure. Award-winning game designer Justin Alexander has created an incredible compendium of advice and maps, perfect for any aspiring game master. This book is packed with strategies you need to create amazing dungeons, battles, roleplay encounters, and more. Full of practical hands-on advice and sample maps, just reading the first chapter of this book will have you ready to run a game in less than an hour. From there, Justin teaches you all the skills and techniques you need to explore dungeons, solve mysteries, and receive still priceless artifacts, unravel strange conspiracies, travel forth on epic journeys, no matter what game you're playing. So, this book is the key to unlocking the limitless realms of your imagination. Justin Alexander is the RPG designer at Atlas Games and the co-creator of the Infinity role-playing game and the deluxe edition of Magical Kitties Save the Day. He's previously worked with Fantasy Flight Games, Modifius, Big Goodman Games, Steve Jackson Games, Dreampod 9, Realms of Fantasy Magazine, Game Trader Magazine, and many others. The Alexandrian is any award-winning website, is an huge online resource for players and game masters alike. He lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So there we go. It's quite a bit small to read, actually. So, you want to be a game master. So, credits and dedication. Table of contents. And we start off with the introduction. And we're straight into action, into the dungeon, with an example of play. And giving you an overview in between of what's going on. So that's quite lengthy. Let's talk about active play and taking your first steps, and also suggesting other role-playing games. That section could be infinite. To be fair, part 1, dungeons. So, essentially, rulings, guidance on handling those, defaulting to yes, making a check, how to handle the rules, and narrating the outcome. And the Dungeon Master's secret weapon, whatever that is the fact that the job is easier than being a player. Perhaps, yes. Anyway, so, we're on to step 2 on how to handle a room. Backing up out, how to handle your first dungeon, how to navigate the map, ending the adventure, and so on. So that's quite a big overview, as it were. It's going to get deeper. So it's asking, what about combat? And then we have a sample adventure. We saw the map of that earlier. And then it's not nicely, basically got a breakdown of each of its locations with excerpts from the map there. I always like that when a dungeon does that. It's a very kind of a more modern approach. It's come about because of things like Morge and Old School Essentials does it, but essentially it's doing that section by section. So you don't really need to refer to the map, back to the main map all the time. And I want to have to run the dungeon. I'm talking about how to track it, how to use a dungeon running sheet. So there we go. Things like encounter checks, and actions in the dungeon, dungeon actions. So that includes movement, combat, conversation, looking at those as steps, so on and so on. So as you would expect, how to run a trap. And then we move on to, we've got a discussion there of 10-foot poles and designing a dungeon. So brainstorming, the challenge rating menu, how to implement that and adhere to it. Sample dungeon locations, just some ideas you know, throwing at you. How to combine ideas. And in some ways this isn't necessarily new. You can almost go back to Lewis Polfus's articles in White Dwarf, sort of like talking about similar things. And here you can see sort of like that similar layout to the dungeon, sort of like drawn in broad detail we saw earlier. So flick back pages. And here we go. So, oh, I've lost it again. So there we go. There's the genesis of it, and there it is in final implementation. Table of symbols for your dungeon, and then keying, so how to describe and detail your dungeon rooms, how to write awesome descriptions, how to handle the exits and the entranceways, so you know, exits and dimensions, and just take you through step by step through that process. You know, whether that's a hallway or a cave, and how to design cake. Because now looking at sort of like looking at combat in the dungeons. Now we're moving on to 5+5 dungeons. At this point, you're hopefully bubbling over with ideas of what first dungeon might be. To get started, I recommend creating a 5+5 dungeon. It's a recipe dungeon, essentially where you have 5+5 ingredients, I presume. So, I mean, pretty much like the concept behind the 5-room dungeon, which I looked at recently, that sort of works for the most part. This looks to be a bit more flexible, and I have a little more open scope for you know, variation of dungeon rooms and the possible rewards. Then we move on to advanced dungeons, but not dragons. So how to customize the action, the dungeon turn, and then we have dungeon levels plus the 5+5 segment. So here we go, putting it into practice. So we've got things like teleports, traps, multiple level chambers, all built into this one location. So it says Xander dungeons. Understand the importance of the non-linear dungeon. We need to look at the exact opposite, the linear dungeon. Yeah, don't if you'll remember designing a linear dungeon then. There we go. So move on to designing random encounter tables, restocking the dungeon after your player character has been through it and wiped everyone out, updating the dungeon essentially for when people have been through, and then dynamic dungeons. So, precious encounter design. Essentially, this is sort of like dealing with other things other than necessarily combat, I think. How to create and add factions to your dungeon. And of course, now all done, now you are the master. So let me move on to doing the same for mysteries. So essentially, you know, the first part here, really talking about dungeons, I mean, that could have been a book all by itself. So you want to be a dungeon master. So, you know, here we've got a bit expanding it about, so how to frame the scene, how to run awesome scenes, setting the scene, location and character, and then the 3-clue rule on how to handle clues and investigated scenes. You'll see lots of advice on this. Some homework, your first mystery. Prepping scenes versus running scenes. And then the idea of node-based adventures. And then how to invert the 3-clue rule, having implemented it. Now you sort of switch it around. Handling funnels. And layer cakes. This is talking about how basic different types of nodes can basically be loops and dead ends. And then thinking about beyond the diagrams, essentially, because there's lots of diagrams there. And then we have a 5-node mystery. A 5x5 campaign. And it's going to be the same for raids and heists. How to run the raid. And then we have theatre of operations, location for a raid or a heist. So how to breach the door, how to handle essentially the assault. What happens during the raid? So raid turn, raid actions, raid perception, what you can see. Dungeon turns versus raid turns versus combat rounds. Okay, what the bad guys actually do, and then how to execute the raid using floor plans. It's the same for urban adventures. Sample city there, or town. Basically describing a gazetteer for the location. Options in the town include downtime, and then we've got progress clock for sort of like things that can be going on in the city. Projects that can be pursued during downtime, and that's including sort of like, you know, the progress of the player characters. Essentially, if they're trying to do an objective, that can be measured in terms of the progress clocks. And then what's faction doing what are factions doing that downtime? And then the idea of the urban crawl instead of a dungeon crawl, including social events. So, for example, a tap room. And then into the wild. So discussions of the nature of watches and progress and lack of sleep and things like that. The route map. So this is building your own. And now we'll have the urban crawl and the dungeon crawl. Now we have the hex crawl, also known as the sand crawl. So there we have a sample sand crawl. And its own running sheet. And then designing a hex crawl for yourself. And you've got a list of possible hex map symbols, so including a mix of terrain and locations, how to stock your hexes, and then wilderness point crawls. This is a process that isn't used very often. It's a bit like the node crawl, as it were, and here we have examples of that map back on various earlier map. We have the many point, homework, creating your own, and at the end we've got extra credit. This is on how to create your campaign, talking about the campaign concept. Campaign status documents, so essentially that you keep a running sort of like a progress report, and then we have, moving on a bit, over change, learning a new role-playing game. So essentially this so far really has been talking about Dungeons and Dragons and similar games like that. And then even talking about mega dungeons, so really big dungeons. Even a quick guide on, basically quick and dirty world building. Adding rumour tables. Put an example there. So basically repeating and restocking rumours, running combat, some more general advice here, I think. Scenario hooks to get your characters involved. Always a kind of difficult thing, because your characters go, oh, I don't care, not interested in that. Oh, yeah, that's kind of happened. How to handle your supporting cast, including a universal NPC role-playing template. Handy list of names at the back there. What happens if you split the party? And so on, and things like, crossovers when it comes down to the time crunch. Balanced spotlight, which is essentially talking about, time the spotlight with different characters. And what's next beyond the book. And it talks about the author's favourite RPGs. That's going to be interesting. Acknowledgements about the author. We've got an index there. So yeah, that's you. So You Want to Be a Game Master by Justin Alexander. Just trying to look at the publisher actually. Page Street Publishing Co. So yeah, I hope that's going to be interesting. I think it would be quite interesting to read. That looks quite interesting and detailed. I'll add that to my review queue. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this unboxing in the Nook. If you did, then please do click on the like button down below. And if you're going to have any comments, if you've got any comments or feedback, I do appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to get more unboxings in the Nook, where you'll see me out here with a package containing a book, or game or role-playing supplement, or in this case a book about role-playing, which I will unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 10 minutes or so, all of course accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea, then please do click on the subscribe button down below. Thanks again for watching. I'll be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.